the face and nothing but open water in front of you.
Well, it's time to get the band back together. This episode of Loki Season 2 continues to deliver for us. This was such a great episode. This show, guys, if it sticks the landing, it might be my new favorite MCU show. I don't know. All right, I want to give you guys a summary before we jump into it, but I also just want to say I have so many theories that I cannot wait to discuss with you. There were so many amazing interpersonal moments and character developments that also happened in this episode. Where do I even begin with that? Okay, but to start, let me give you a summary. But before I do, I want to know from you, who was your favorite character's, like, reality that they were living in? And also, why was it Obi's? You get the best one. And what are your theories for the finale? Because we need to talk about that. But before we do, let me break it down for you in terms of this summary for the episode.
Break it down for me.
A lot happened, but at the same time, not that much happened in terms of, like, moving parts. It's a lot of, like, who is this character? What are they about? A lot of moments like that. Wow, my hair was bad for most of that. Oh well, I'll just time slip to a time when it was better. So, to start, we have basically the revelation that we all kind of were guessing, which is that Loki survives while everyone else seemingly gets, sort of pruned by the fact that the loom explodes, which resets them all back to their timelines. Loki reverts back to time slipping and attempts to reach out to everyone across time that he comes across who were his former companions. He's basically trying to bring people back together so they can save the TVA. After reconnecting with Obi, who is the only one who believes him, Loki realizes he needs to basically bring the band back together, get their collective time or a juice going, and fix the TVA. And that's one of the ways that he can do that. Possibly the only way he can do that. We shall see. He does attempt to do this, sort of, but he runs out of time before they can actually all go back to fix the TVA. And just as that happens, he finally realizes how to control his time slipping by focusing on the friends that he cares most about at the TVA. And that allows him to time slip back to before the TVA melted down, and setting us up beautifully for what will come next. The loops are closing, friends. The loops are closing, and I know that this is going to be the last season of Loki, and I'm just not ready to say goodbye. But I also know it's probably going to lead into something really cool. Hopefully, maybe. We'll have to see, I guess, what happens with some other stuff and what they're planning. But let's talk about just some of the stuff that happened this episode, why I loved it, and also what I think about what's going to happen in this finale. I got theories. So, the reset versus just back where they've always been. This is just a little semantic thing, although I gotta say, I really love how in Loki, every time there's something that's time travel, sci-fi based, they do such a great job of explaining it in a way that you're like, yeah, I can accept that. That makes sense. But also leaving a little bit that's just open for you to be like, but does it work exactly like this or does it work like this? Either way, it makes sense, but I just want to know. And so for me, that was the reset versus, is this just them on the timeline where they were before they were basically taken by the TVA? But I also assume that because the TVA doesn't exist, then them coming there would have never existed, if that makes sense. So that's kind of how I'm choosing to interpret this. Although it does seem from a lot of the language that, like, the implication is that everyone was, like, reset. But you also have to consider that's from Sylvie and Loki's perspective, who weren't really reset. Also, yeah, Obi's life in his reality is so fantastic and somewhat tragic and just so fun. What did we do? What did we do to deserve Key? Because I don't know if we deserve what we have here with Obi. It's so good. When he dropped the books, oh, I was so sad. I really felt it, even though I was like, of course he's gonna drop the books. That's so typical. But so, I don't know, this show sometimes does things that are typical in a way that feels really grounded, and I just think it has a lot to do with the performances. While it is predictable, it doesn't feel typical, if that makes sense. Just because of the way the performance is done. It feels genuine. Everything feels so genuine. And it's such a weird show for that, because this is a weird time travel weird thing. So we create that, I don't know. So the plan here is, of course, that Obi says is that Loki needs to basically get everyone together to sort of recreate the time aura they all have collectively, and that should help them to sort of go back to a time that you can't even really time travel to because the TVA exists outside of time. And I loved this explanation because the way it was explained, it just made so much sense. And you're like, yeah. But I also loved that Obi says a very particular line. He says, you know, we need to get the band back together. And it just made me think of DC. And I was like, man, DC's we need to get the band back together versus Marvel's we need to get the band back together. Look, I love DC, but Marvel's still crushing it. Because when I had that comparison in my head, I was like, oh, it's a way better use of, you know, we need to get the band back together. As typical, once again, as that line is. It just fits so well. And it makes more sense, I think, here is the other thing. Also, when they do get the band back together, Loki goes and he obviously collects Mobius to their cause. And Mobius is living this life selling jet skis, as we'd assume, and trying to take care of his 2 sons after his wife passed away. And he has this moment where he is the fish out of water. And it's this perfect contrast to the beginning of Loki, where Loki comes to TVA and he's like, what is all this? And he basically is like, I don't belong in this place. Like, I'm gonna get out of here. Like, what even is this? I don't understand anything. Where Mobius is basically doing that. And Loki says to him, you know, I need you. I need you to help me save this. I need you to help me fix this. And that's exactly what Mobius does to him. I also feel like there's a side to Mobius here that we saw that was really, like, kind of sad. Because it implies that Mobius felt content in his life at the TVA, because on some level, I think he knew his life in reality was tragic. I don't know if he actually knew that, but maybe subconsciously. It feels to me like both of them could kind of be running sometimes from things. Mobius at his job, you know, trying to kind of ignore his sons and I think escaping through his love of jet skis. Which is hilarious on paper, but is, like, really sad in actuality. And it makes sense now why Mobius was like, look, I know who you are. I get it. I get it. Even if he didn't remember that life. In a lot of ways, including that way, it feels like the loops in this show are closing. We're really coming to the end. And it's beautiful and bittersweet. And I'm so excited to see where it goes next. One of the hardest, I think, moments for me in this series was when Sylvie asks Loki to really get to the reason why he needs the TVA back. And he says, you know, I need my friends back. Man, it's gonna make me cry just thinking about it. Like, man, that line was delivered so well. When she says, you know, well, you know, your friends are where they need to be. And he's like, yeah, but if I don't have them, like, where do I belong? Like, I don't belong anywhere. And I was like, Loki, that's so sad. The fact that we can take a character as well that has been as despicable as Loki and really make us feel for both him and Sylvie. And this empowering moment almost of them both realizing that they're being selfish, but that, like, it's kind of okay. The other thing that I really loved is how Sylvie says, you know, you need to, like, figure out your own story. Like, you need to become basically the master of your own story and find that for yourself. And I was like, Loki and the god of stories. That's how you know we're coming full circle, because that's kind of Loki's through line, I think, in the comics, in terms of the character arc coming to, like, the full fruition. Like, overall. Like, obviously Loki is still the god of stories in the comics right now, so it's still ongoing. But I just mean that's the grand character arc. That's, like, the level 15 if we're talking, like, D&D terms. I think you top out at level 15. This show also always throws me curveballs in an interesting way, where, like, I was expecting a lot of the stuff that happened with Loki and getting everyone together and kind of how their reaction was going to be, a lot of that stuff, and where people were going to be in their realities. I had theories that were pretty accurate, but near the end, when Loki comes back and everyone's finally together except for Sylvie, and he's ready to give up, and then Sylvie comes in and is like, okay, you guys are right, my reality just like crumbled. We need to fix it. And then the temp pad disappears. And then everyone starts to disappear and everybody's like just dying. I was like, wait, what is happening? I'm so confused. How do we get out of this? I love how this show just goes to the places you don't expect, because you're like, that would be writing yourself into a corner, and then it just continues right along. And the fact that losing everyone that he cares about at the TVA and related to it allowed Loki to gain control of his time slipping, because he realized, you know, what he was losing. And that's the who of you know, these people and what they mean to him, is what allowed him to control the time slipping. Is one, really beautiful and poetic, and two, is like genius plot writing, where you're like, oh yeah, that's how you write yourself out of that. Now he has control of the time slipping, which means, of course, he can go back to the beginning. But what does that mean? Let's talk about that. Well, I mean, I think the question I have, a big question, is why did he start time slipping again? Why is Loki... I mean, I understand Loki isn't affected by everything crumbling because he seems to exist outside of time when he's time slipping. So things disintegrating in time doesn't affect him. But why did he start time slipping again? Why is that where he gets reset to? Why doesn't Sylvie also get reset to her time? I kind of have thoughts about that, but it might have to do with the fact that she's been outside of it for so long. I don't know. Could have to do with time auras. There's a lot of ways you could explain this, but I'm just curious as to if we're going to get an answer and if it's going to mean something big or not. I mean, I think we'll only get an answer if it really means something. Otherwise, it'll just be, you can give yourself a theory for that. But it's interesting. I also am wondering if this is all a part of Kang's plan. Something Obi said in this episode, where he basically said, it seems like you end up where you need to be at the right time to talk to the people that you need to talk to and do the stuff you need to do. Like when he grabbed the TVA guide and then he gives it to Obi, and that's the key to him being able to figure out how to create the temp pad and all that stuff. That's interesting to me. And it makes me wonder, like in the flashback at the beginning of this, we got He Who Remains basically saying like, you guys came here to the end of time because you were on a path that I chose for you. So it makes me wonder, is all of this that or not? I feel like all roads lead to Kang here, which could be a problem for the MCU depending on what happens next. But I think we still have to kind of wait and see with that, personally. Is this leading us into the Kang dynasty? That's the question. And I feel like the answer is probably yeah, based on what I'm seeing here. There's been talk in articles about what Marvel's going to do depending on what happens with Jonathan Majors and how they might pivot towards Doctor Doom, which I think in a lot of ways could make sense. You could make that work for sure, I think. But I don't think that'll happen in this show, but I'm wondering if there's something that we'll see in here as to how that could work. I don't think they built it in to Loki because they already did all of Loki before everything else happened. However, I'm just curious if there might be some breadcrumbs we could pick up. I already get Doctor Doom vibes. I've been getting Doctor Doom vibes since season 1. So for me, I'm like, Doctor Doom could be somewhere tied in, I think. And what will happen when Loki rewrites time? That's what I want to know. Will everyone go back? How far back we gonna go? I don't know. Some people were theorizing that this show could reset the entire MCU. I don't think that's gonna happen, especially not based on where we saw Loki go back to at the end of this episode. But I am wondering like what implications it could have for all of these characters and potentially people outside of Loki as well. And like what will happen after? That's my question. So we save the TVA, and then what happens? What does Loki do? Like, would Loki stay at the TVA if everything goes well? It's like either way this show goes, whether we save the day or don't necessarily save the day or do some partial thing, I have no idea where we're headed next, and I love that about it. It feels like everything's important, but you don't really know what's going to happen. You just have theories. We love that. I love that personally. It's so much fun. The main question for me is going to be, is the season finale going to stick the landing or not? Because if it really sticks the landing, if it knocks it out of the park, it may take WandaVision's place as my favorite MCU show. It's hard to top WandaVision for me because I just feel like that show was so fun and inventive and also so emotional. But the ending was a little wonky. I will admit that. The ending could have been better. But if this ending's perfect, I don't know. But it also depends on what happens after, I think, as to how people will think of the show with the MCU. So there's a lot riding on this ending. So I think it's important that we also acknowledge that pressure and like take a deep breath, let the pressure out, and just sort of blank slate our minds, reset our minds, so we can go into the season finale not expecting, you know, the whole world of one show. Be hype, but just sometimes I think we need to check our hype as fans. I say that with much love for all of us as fans. Anyways, friends, that's all I have to say about this episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I hope that you are psyched about the season finale, and I hope that you enjoyed seeing Loki sort of close the loop. It was really beautiful. I'm glad we got the band back together, only for them to all perish, but now we're really gonna get the band back together, and then we're gonna see what happens next. Oh man, what's gonna happen with the TVA? What's gonna happen with Kang? All right, well, I'll see you in the next one, and until then, friends, stay nerdy.